What's good, people of God? It's your boy, Minister Maurice Barnes, aka Minister Mo, aka Young Peter in the Garden of Gethsemane. I'm your host for Church in the Streets. And tonight I want to talk about being summoned, being called. A lot of people think that because they don't attend church regularly, because they don't attend church traditionally, that they can't have a call on their life. Like God didn't create them to do something magnificent. Like God didn't create you to reach someone, to teach someone, to use your life to minister to someone. That's probably one of the biggest misunderstandings I run into a lot doing church in the streets. The words call and calling come to us from the Latin word vocatio. That's where we get the English word vocation. A vocation is a calling, a recognition that someone, God, or something calls a particular group of people an opportunity to seize or problem solve has taken hold of us and won't let go. It's a summons, if you will. The prophet Jeremiah was called to prophesy to Judah and her surrounding nations, and he described his call as a fire shut up in my bones. If I say I will not mention him or speak any more in his name, there is in my heart as if it were a burning flame shut up in my bones, and I am weary with holding it in, and I cannot. Jeremiah 20th chapter, 9th verse. How he is torn with this inner tension of fear and a dislike of proclaiming the truth, because it only subjects him to ridicule and scorn. And yet, when he resolved to quit, he found he could not, because the fire of God was burning in his bones, and he had to say something. You know anything about that? Perhaps not in the sense of public speaking or public preaching, because we weren't all called to do that. But have you ever felt that you just had to speak out? Some injustice, some moral perversity, some scandalous conduct, some loveless hypocrisy that was occurring. You just couldn't keep quiet about it. And yet you knew that if you spoke out, you would only get in trouble and nobody would ever thank you for it. You'd only upset the status quo and create strife, but you couldn't contain yourself. You ever felt that way? A calling seizes you. It takes a hold of you. You didn't invent it. It's not the same as thinking logically going through a career path. You don't make it up, it comes to you. You might come to understand it as something that's been present in your life for a long time. But even then, it's something from outside yourself. As I'm describing it here, it comes from God. Calling is not just for those who believe they're summoned to do church work. My friends have causes that they are passionate about because they are called in those areas. Nehemiah was called to lead a massive public works project. Esther was called to help avert widespread genocide. A lot of these things didn't really do with the traditional church. It had to do with the people who are essentially the church that we're talking about. So, if you're called to the homeless or you're called to help save the planet, there are a lot of things that we're called to do in the kingdom, and they all contribute to the kingdom. Have you ever heard God's call? As Jesus was walking by the shore of the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon Peter and Simon's brother Andrew casting the net in the sea. They were fishermen. And Jesus said to them, "Follow me as my disciples, accepting me as your master and teacher, and walking the same path of life that I walk, and I will make you fishers of men." I read that from Mark, 1st chapter, 16th to 17th verses out of the Amplified. But it doesn't matter where you start. What matters is how you finish. Why Jesus chose the disciples? We talked about that in episode 1, because he was trying to reach the 12 tribes of Israel that were scattered about. But he took men that were common for those areas. First of all, I want to shatter the myth about Christ and his disciples being weak, feeble men. They walk around all bony and scrawny. Simon and his brother Andrew, these men were fishermen. Those nets heavy. Those fish were heavy. They pulling in empty nets, wet, soggy nets all day. They had to be buff. Their physique had to be intimidating. But he got them to teach them to go back and teach. They were called to be fishers of men. And the Great Commission continues to go on. They ain't know nothing about preaching, but he still called them. They preached from how they were taught to live. And that's what, as believers, we should do. If you got a call on your life, then whatever your calling is, whatever it is that you're passionate about, that you can't go 5 minutes out of the day without thinking about it, those areas of your life should be in such great presentation that when you speak on those things, when you teach on those things, when people look at your life, they see a reflection of what you're saying. How calling comes to us. I feel like Calling comes to us in a lot of ways, but I would like to speak on four for the sake of this episode here. Let's say you want to hear God's call, or you've already heard God's call and you want to refine it. Here are four ways that God might speak. Sometimes they overlap, sometimes they're all inclusive, sometimes it's just one. The first one is through awe-inspiring encounters. Think burning bushes and bright lights from heaven. Awe-inspiring encounters are unmistakable experiences of God's presence that show us God is with us and has work for us to do. As with Moses at the burning bush or Saul on the road to Damascus, God might meet you in an undeniable, unforgettable, awe-inspiring way. Maybe you were in a car accident and you totaled your vehicle, but you walked away without a scratch. Maybe you were somewhere you shouldn't have been doing something you shouldn't have been doing, in a situation where you know you should have been hurt or you should have lost your life, but you didn't. God showed up for you. He kept you because he has work for you. He kept you because there's a call on your life, and he would dare not let you leave this earth without fulfilling his presence, his purpose for your life. The second one would be indirectly through other people. These are occasions when other people take action on our behalf to dedicate us to God or recruit us into a specific work, like Hannah dedicating Samuel, or Mordecai engaging Esther's help, Paul recruiting Timothy, or John the Baptist's parents giving him to the Lord at birth. The calling then becomes actualized when it's accepted and embraced personally. Maybe as you were coming up and you got into young adulthood, one of the elders or one of the men from your church or your community pulled you to the side to help them with projects that involve young people. And the more you start working with young people, the more you felt the need to help, to teach, to reach, to influence, to better the lives of young people. Somebody kind of pushed you into an area because they saw the call on your life before you did. That's what I'm talking about here. You may have had a family friend that nudged you into a volunteer event that turned into something you made into a lifelong career, or something you turned into a business. The third is through provisional circumstances. You might look back at different circumstances in your life, or look around at current factors and conclude that God is directing you toward a particular cause or a group of people. This was the case with Nehemiah, when he discovered how poorly Jerusalem and Judah were faring in the 5th century BC. Because Nehemiah experienced a growing inner conviction that God was leading him to serve in Jerusalem, he had all kinds of opposition that he faced, but he went and did it. And he completed the task because he was called to do so, because he wouldn't have been able to sleep at night if he didn't, because it was, like Jeremiah said, a fire trapped up in his bones. The fourth and last one that I want to talk about tonight is through the recognition of God's shaping of your life, seeing God at work in your story. By reading your story, you can find indicators of what you're passionate about, what your gifts are, how you prefer to interact with others, and which experiences have most clearly directed you thus far. Put these together, and you can start to discern God's call. For me, as I look back over my life and I see the situations that God allowed me to survive, that he brought me through, that he kept me through, I know that he put me in those situations so that when I encounter people that are at that place in life, I have an empathy for them that's genuine because I've been there. I don't tell them what they think they should do. I tell them what they should do to get through to the other side. I tell them what I did. But not only do that, I hold their hand and walk with them through the process. My bishop, Bishop Maurice Valentine, he tells a story about a man who had fallen in a hole and he was injured. And the first man that came by was a pastor. And the man screamed up to him from the hole about how he needed help, how he was hurt, how he was injured. And the pastor wrote some scriptures down on a piece of paper and tossed them in the hole, told the man to read the scriptures and he would be okay, and walked away. The second man that came up was a doctor. The man was screaming up for the doctor, and the doctor wrote him some prescriptions and tossed them in there and said, when you get out, take these and you'll feel better, and walked away. And the third man that came by heard the man screaming from the hole. He heard the man screaming from the pit, and he jumped down in there with him. And the man in the pit, like, what are you doing? Now we both here. We both stuck. The man was like, no, we're not both stuck. I've been here before, and I know how to get out. And I'm going to show you how to get out. This is, as a church, how we should be. This is how our lives should be. We should live in such a manner to where we're more than able to help those in need. We're more than capable of helping someone through a situation that they're in. In Exodus 3rd chapter, 4th verse, it says, when the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called it to him out of the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, here am I. Moses answered the call. Despite his condition in life, despite the excuses that he tried to give to God, despite the things that he wanted to say, he ultimately answered the call in his life. And how did he do that? How do we do that? If you feel like there's a call on your life, in the comment section, I'm going to post a website link where you can go and take a spiritual gifts test. You can see what spiritual gifts that you have. And if you would like to hone those areas out, we'll also provide resources for you to do so. But once you answer that call, the first thing that you must do is surrender. Leaders in the Bible struggle with their specific callings, as well as with one-time acts of obedience. Moses protested God's call, even while he knelt barefoot as God spoke to him out of a burning bush. He didn't want to confront Pharaoh. He told God he wasn't a good speaker. Jonah ran from God's call. He didn't want to preach to the people of Nineveh. He didn't want to preach to the Ninevites. He knew that if they repented, God would forgive them. And he didn't want that. He spent 3 days in the depths of misery before he said yes to God. And even then, he continued to be angry with God. You can find that part of Jonah's story in the 4th chapter of Jonah, 1st and 2nd verses. But there are a couple reasons why Jonah didn't want to obey God. First, the Ninevites were wicked, violent people who showed their enemies no mercy. They would torture you, kill you, put your body on display, and then paint a picture for everybody to see what they did to you. I'm not going to Nineveh. They slaughter people there. May have seemed the practical choice from Jonah's perspective, but you got to see the book of Nahum to see that. The second reason Jonah disobeyed God is made clear in the 4th chapter, 1st and 2nd verses. He didn't want to preach to these people because he was afraid they might actually repent and be forgiven. Nineveh was a major city in the Assyrian Empire, and if its citizens were to escape God's judgment, they could eventually conquer Israel. So Jonah preferred to let God deal with them, let him rain his fiery wrath on them. He wanted them destroyed. You have any Ninevites, any haters in your life? Someone with whom God wants you to share the gospel, but to whom you refuse to go? Is there anyone who's done you wrong so that you prefer to see them judged rather than forgiven? That's how Jonah felt. And that, as a body of believers, that's something that we must do away with. We can't make God like us because I don't like such and such. I don't think God gonna like him. God can save anybody but such and such. It may be that one person that God has for you to reach, that you pass them by every Sunday in your Cadillac on your way to your mega church. That one person that's watching you, waiting on you to stop and invite them to come with you. Get them that invitation so that they can get the same type of salvation that you have. But see, that comes from obedience. Jeremiah didn't want to be God's spokesperson. He told God he was too young to speak. The rich young ruler, he didn't want to sell his possessions and give to the poor. Everybody had their reasons, but surrender means that we give up control. It means that we deny any self and relinquish things like needing to be in charge, needing to have all the answers in advance, needing to look good or to be famous. It means walking with God, often into the unknown, trusting God to lead, to provide, trusting God to come through. Sometimes God will strip away everything that we think that we have to give us every single thing that he knows we need to fulfill the call that he has on our life. But we have to be obedient. We have to have obedience. Obedience is one of the foundational virtues that Jesus forms in those calls and in those who he calls. He gives us the strength to obey as we make the choice to obey. Notice I said we make the choice to obey because obedience is a choice. Obedience is one of the chief ways that we demonstrate our love for God. Not singing Christian songs, not leading the praise team, not being the minister of music, not being the best editor, not being the best spokesperson for your church. By obeying the word of God. Not saying these things are bad, not saying these aren't things that we should do, but hear what Jesus said. If you love me, keep my commandments. Stepping up to live and lead with Jesus requires that we learn to keep in step with him, to obey. It's for our good and for the good of those we lead. And when I say those we lead, people are going to be looking at you, regardless of if you're in a mega ministry, regardless of if your ministry is just starting, regardless of if you're evangelizing, regardless of if you're just sharing the gospel with your friends. People are going to look at your life. They're going to see how you live. They're going to see is it lining up with what you're saying. That's why you got to have discipline. Discipline is enforced obedience. Connect with strong men and women of God. That's why we don't forsake ourselves or fellowship with one another, so that we have people that we're accountable to. Get yourself an accountability partner, somebody that you can call when things are getting rough, a 3 a.m. person, somebody that if you're tempted to go out tonight because you've been delivered and you're disciplining yourself not to go back to some of the things that you were delivered from, and you feel the temptation to do that, someone that you can reach out to, that you can call, that'll give it to you straight. This is what we should be doing as a body of believers. This is what we should be doing as the church. And in these streets, we all have different calls, but we all have a call on our life. Are you exercising the call that's on your life? Or are you just watching other people do it? Or are you making excuses because the religious people and the overly spiritual people are judging because of what someone else is doing? At the end of the day, we're going to be accountable for our actions, what we did with the time that he gave us. How many people did we help? How many lives did we change? How many atmospheres did we shift? That's what it's all about. Souls, winning souls for the kingdom. Not about boosting membership, not about building new fancy buildings that people come to worship in. It's about saving souls. And that's what we're trying to do in these streets. And that's why we have in church industries. Thank y'all for having church with us tonight. I'm Minister Maurice Barnes, a.k.a. Minister Mo, a.k.a. Young Peter in the Garden of Gethsemane. It's been Church in the Streets. It's been real. Till next week, y'all.